Welcome back to KK's Quilt Studio. Today I'm going to talk about a quilt that I did recently, and I used a combination of Art and Stitch and ProStitcher Premium to get this quilt laid out. Now it is a chevron quilt, and I'm quilting in zigzags, which is different than stitching an edge to edge, so this would probably be classified as a custom quilt. It was a real challenge, so I thought I would share with you how I worked through that challenge. So I started in Art and Stitch, and I drew up this square to represent a half square triangle in the quilt. This whole quilt was comprised of half square triangles, and then I constructed sort of a quilt top, rotating those half square diagrams. I've got about 8 squares here laid out to symbolize the zigzag effect of the chevron. And why didn't I use a picture or photo of the quilt as a backdrop? And because I wanted a more accurate representation of the size and format layout of the quilt. And if you take a picture, it's not always square, because unless you are spot on to that quilt, it can be a little skewed, so it doesn't give you a true representation of the size. And that's why I felt that these drawings of the half square triangles would give me a better representation in order to lay out my designs. Now the red flower is the quilting pattern that I used. I think this is Plumeria Garden from Stonehouse Quilts. And I did some resizing and skewing of this design to get this layout. So it looks a little bit, this is not the exact file that I used, but it'll give you an idea of how I manipulated that design into the chevron form. So let's go back to the slides I have here. I'm at the quilting machine, and this is, I brought it up in ProStitcher Premium, and you'll see I connected 2 peaks of the chevron. I felt this was a safe enough path. Quilts aren't always square, and the squares aren't always square, so I felt this was a safe enough path or width. So I would sew 2 peaks of the quilt and then stop at this point and relocate my pattern and scoot on down the quilt. And so I would do it 2 peaks at a time. And where I needed to crop off the edge of the quilt, I would just do a crop box and crop off that edge. And here is a picture of sewing out that design. And then let's move ahead to the next portion of the quilt. I also used that same quilt background form to do this would be representing the white area, and this is my own design that I came up with, and I took this design, it's just one, and then it is flipped over. So I did 2 or 3 of these together and would stitch them out and sized it and centered it at my quilt and then sewed that out. And then I did a record function from the ProStitcher Premium, and I did the edges of the lines of the block, and so we'll talk about that next. We've had some discussion in the groups lately about the record and mark function to ProStitcher Premium. So in ProStitcher Premium, if you select the ProStitcher and record, you can start at any point on your quilt, and I started in the seams and went about a 1/4 inch away and just used my mark feature, and this will stitch out. So here I am marking, going to a point on the quilt and marking where I wanted to set that running stitch. And here is the as it appears as I'm marking along on that chevron in the quilt in ProStitcher. And then here I stitched it along the edge, and you'll see what a nice edge stitch that gives to your quilt. So I didn't use rulers on that, and I did both sides, the top and the bottom of the blue zigzag of the quilt. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope that you'll try the mark feature on your next quilt top when you go to outline a quilt or need to do some stitching in the ditch. That was probably the funnest part of the quilt, but getting all the other quilting to align was a little bit difficult and challenging, but I thought I would share with you how I accomplished this quilt and didn't let it get the best of me. So I wish you happy quilting, and I'll see you next time. If you have any questions about the video, be sure to drop me a line or put a note in the comments, because somebody else may have had the same question. Give me a thumbs up if you like the video, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Happy sewing!